About a month ago, up-and-coming game dev YouTuber HawkesJam announced the Game Jam in celebration of him reaching 5,000 subscribers. Since I'd never done a Game Jam before, I thought this beginner-friendly environment with a smaller audience would be a perfect place to start. On March 27th, the theme was announced to be microscopic magic. That night, I made a Google Doc to plan out my project. I wanted to make a card game where the character travels along a board and the player can decide which card to use to overcome different obstacles. Spoiler alert, that's not what I end up making. On day one, I opened up my favorite program, Blockbench, and modeled a grass tile, then I imported it into Godot. I really wanted to make the player character move along a path 3D, but eventually I decided to just use a grid map instead because I didn't know how to extrude my grass tile along a path. I went back into Blockbench and modeled the first and only obstacle, then added it to the grid map's mesh library and placed some spikes on top of the grass. I thought it looked pretty good, so that was the end of day one. The next day, I opened up Blockbench again and modeled a little wizard. I made his walk animation in Godot as it wasn't anything complex, and then I brainstormed some more about how he should move around the level. I decided to just work on the grid map and started figuring out how to apply collision shapes to each tile because I wanted the player to die on contact with the spikes. This was a headache, but I eventually got it sorted out. Then I made him walk in a circle while I stared at my computer hoping for inspiration to strike. It didn't.
It's time to do.
Day 3, I started off by disabling the built-in shadows because I didn't know how to make them look good, and I just put a transparent circle underneath the player's feet. I cleaned up some of the grid map collision, and then I thought I should try to figure out how navigation regions work, but I ended up giving up on that too, and I was just looking for something more fun to work on, so I made a fireball that the player could destroy the spikes with. I really wanted to use an orthogonal perspective, but shooting the fireball from the camera's position didn't work well because it didn't change size, and you couldn't tell when it was going to hit the spikes. So I just decided to figure that out later and just stick with a perspective camera. I wanted to add some more game feel, so I worked on the particle effects and also made an explosion by following a tutorial on YouTube. I also wanted to add camera shake, but that doesn't end up happening. I was still stuck on the idea of having an orthogonal camera, and it turns out all I had to do to make it look good was move the fireball spawn position to the top of the screen. After this change, I thought the game looked a lot better and a lot more stylized. There was something going on at the bottom left of the screen though, and I was convinced that it was something to do with the explosion particles just spawning in the wrong place, so I wasted some time trying to fix it until I realized it was just the camera clipping into the tiles. I went into the camera settings and tweaked some numbers until it went away. There was another weird thing going on where smoke particles would just spawn in randomly, except it wasn't random, they were just hidden behind the explosion effect and it looked like they were coming out of nowhere. I just made the smoke get drawn on top of everything, but I make it look better later. I thought I might try to make the grid map move instead of the player, but quickly realized it would lead to some problems, so I just didn't do that. I figured it was time to make the level infinite, so I found a tutorial online for spawning tiles and tweaked it to fit my needs. The next step was to randomly spawn in spikes, so I did that. At this point, I wasn't sure how I would delete the tiles once they got too far from the player, but I actually never end up fixing that, so there's just like an infinite level spawning at all times. I made a model for a bridge and gave the player the ability to spawn them across random gaps that would just appear out of nowhere, then converted it to a scene instead of a grid map tile so that I could animate its appearance. I also made the wizard run faster over time, as that's typically what endless runners do, and my game would be very boring if it was the same speed the whole time. Up until this point, I had never worked on music for a game, so I decided to dedicate day 5 to doing just that, and also some UI. I downloaded FL Studio for like the first time ever, watched a short tutorial, and made what's probably the dopest menu music you've ever heard other than Battle Block Theater. I I messed around in Audacity to record some sounds for the wizard's footsteps. I made several for both the grass and the wooden bridge and randomized which sound plays so that it isn't just the same one over and over again. I used SFXR to make the sound for the explosion as well as the noise that plays when a bridge spawns. On day 6, I literally did nothing.